Hi, I'm John. I am a practicing Catholic with a master's degree in Catholic Theology, and I found the experience of watching Supernatural very strange. The translation from religion to TV show on Supernatural was very mangled, but it still seems pretty evident that the show is trying to work within a broadly Catholic framework, a framework that has a more high church conception of the human soul, of angels, and of hell. From the episodes which I saw, which were from the first 6 seasons, Supernatural was an engaging character drama with much more sincerity than what you usually find on the CW network. It featured good interactions between the main characters, and especially between the two monster-hunting brothers, Sam and Dean. However, the show is really bad at adapting religious source material, and when it diverged from established religious tradition, it was very noticeable. And today I'm going to complain about it. To me, the strangest of these liberties with the source material was how Supernatural tackled the topic of angels. Angels were a type of character I was really excited to have appear on the show. I had heard that there was a prominent angel who was a series regular later on, so I expected their appearance, but I didn't know anything about that character in particular. In many ways, the introduction of angels was a culmination of the Mulder and Scully sort of dynamic that Sam and Dean had during the first 3 seasons of Supernatural, which was best exemplified in the House of the Holy episode, where Sam believes in angels as God's holy messengers and warriors, and in their opposition to the demons and evil spirits that Sam and Dean were combating every episode. During that same episode, Sam reveals to Dean that he prays to God, which Dean thinks is ridiculous because the only spiritual forces that Dean has ever experienced have been negative ones. Dean's whole life he's done nothing but kill or banish mystical creatures, and the possibility of a benevolent one feels insulting to him with all the tragedy he's experienced. So when our first angel character, Castiel, was introduced in Season 4, Episode 1, I was initially so excited. Not only were we getting an angel character who undeniably identified himself as an angel of the Lord, but he was portrayed as an extremely alien, powerful, and yet genuinely righteous character who was unwavering in his commitment to carrying out the divine plan. But despite the strong introduction of angels in that first episode, how they were actually implemented during the rest of the season was very weird. To explain why that was, I need to back up and answer the question, what is an angel in the Catholic conception? An angel is a purely incorporeal creature, unlike humans who are intentionally created to be a unified body and soul. And the idea is that after death, a human soul still has a desire for their body, and it will eventually be returned to them at the end of time. But angels, on the other hand, do not have a desire for a body, because a pure spirit like an angel is higher on the chain of being than is a human. Even though having a body is a fully good thing for a human, with respect to species, a human is not in the same league, so to speak, as an angel. And because angels are higher on the chain of being, there are certain respects in which they are more like God. And being more like God has consequences for what an angel can actually do. The most important consequence is something Doctor of the Church Thomas Aquinas calls aeviternity. Aeviternity is the midpoint between a being such as God's relationship with time, where he is totally apart from time and superior to it, versus a human's relationship with time, where we are fully immersed into time and constrained by it. But angels are neither, since there was a time before they existed, yet they do not sit in time in the same way that we do. This means that an angelic will doesn't make a series of choices in the same way that a human will does. Humans can flip-flop about being a good person or a bad person day by day, or even minute by minute, but angels have to pick. All of their choices are oriented towards good, or all of their choices are oriented towards evil all of the time. So when Supernatural has a character tell Castiel that he needs to learn to think for himself, it just sounds like nonsense. Angels already know infinitely more than any living person, so an angel isn't failing to think for himself by following God. An angel right now in the real world can't defect or switch between aiding the forces of heaven or hell, because every individual choice is a choice they already made, because that's just the category or type of being that an angel is. Now, from a writing perspective, I totally understand why the writers of Supernatural did not adapt this sort of lore-accurate idea of an angel. Firstly, most fictional properties that tackle the topic of angels don't bother, and secondly, a lore-accurate angel would essentially force every angel character to have a flat story arc, which would of course be a very hard thing to do because most viewers prefer characters who have dynamic arcs. If the angels were written in a lore-accurate way, then every bad angel would have to be written like an Emperor Palpatine or a Sauron, and every good angel would have to be a Captain America or a Paddington. But the thing is, there's nothing wrong with an interesting writing constraint that you have to think creatively to adapt your story around. I think that an angel with a flat arc, some kind of angelic paladin with a strict ethical code, would have been an interesting writing challenge that I wish the team behind the show had had the desire to explore. because it's certainly not impossible to do, as a character like Gandalf demonstrates. And frankly, Castiel is most of the way there already, at least how he was presented in Season 4. They would just have had to lean a little more into his stoicism and dry wit. The other thing about ignoring how angels respond to a concept like time and choice is that you essentially turn every angel character into a really powerful human being, rather than a genuinely separate sort of creature. Without angelic will and Ave Eternity, an angel, as presented on Supernatural, is basically just a superhero, and the world, even the world of 2005, had good superhero content already without confusing it for a horror or urban fantasy show. The other thing this show does to spice up its angel lore is to reinterpret famous angels that the audience would already know as heroes to be antagonists. I'm thinking especially about the Archangels Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel. My main complaint about the depiction of these three characters especially is that Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel are all angels that real modern Catholics have a devotion to. We intercede to them, we honor them at the Feast of Michaelmas every September, and some of us even choose one of the three as our confirmation name during the sacrament of confirmation. Many churches also say the prayer to St. Michael at the end of their masses, asking for his protection from the forces of evil. It really pained me to see these particular names applied to these characters on Supernatural, because unlike Thor or Mercury, most normal people don't venerate ancient pagan deities, and reinterpreting them is pretty radically different from interpreting the religious figures of an active religious tradition, particularly when those characters are clearly in the lawful good category and you move them to chaotic neutral. Lucifer is another angel character whose portrayal is very weird on Supernatural. Lucifer gives his own explanation of how he fell from grace, in which God told Lucifer to love humanity more than God himself, and Lucifer refused, seeing the imperfection of humanity in relation to God. While Lucifer could of course just be lying about his origin story to make himself seem more sympathetic, if we take what he says as actually true in the universe of Supernatural, it's just complete crazy pants. Every individual is supposed to love God above any created creature, and God would never ask one of his angels to love a human more than him. Instead, as a basic principle of Christian ethics, love of God is the most primary call of every person, with the secondary call being love of neighbor, as referenced in the Gospel of Mark chapter 12. As revenge on God, Supernatural's Lucifer created a parody race from humans called demons, which is another unique decision of this show, since the classical demon is, again, not any kind of human, nor are they derived in any way from a human, but they are instead angels themselves who turn their back on God. Rather than having demons be fallen angels, the demons of this show are humans who went to hell, but somehow aren't serving out their sentence and instead get out for bad behavior, and get to run around on Earth and inflict more pain, which is a very bizarre idea, but one that I can understand as a practical measure to hype up the introduction of angels in Season 4, and to make Deem's trip to hell a more harrowing experience since he's worried about becoming a demon himself. I don't want to spend this whole video just complaining about a CW program's bad theology of angels, but I do have to briefly touch on the problem of bodies. As I alluded to earlier, angels do not require, nor do they desire bodies. However, when serving as God's messengers, God allows them to assume bodies for a particular mission, such as in the Bible when angels visit Lot to help him escape the destruction of Sodom, or when Gabriel appeared to the priest Zechariah in the temple. This is a completely different thing than the behavior of demons possessing people for a nefarious purpose. And this is absolutely key because a demon in the Catholic understanding is a spirit who is working against the power of God. And so, of course, he has to steal a body if he wants to accomplish some particular evil act in human form. But an angel is a spirit who is cooperating with God's will, and so God gives them a visible form without them needing to possess anyone. In Supernatural, however, every spiritual creature, good or evil, has to possess the body of a particular human being, often at great personal cost to that person. And I think this is another huge missed opportunity for the show to differentiate between Lucifer and the forces of heaven, because instead of drawing this distinction between how angels and humans are able to make themselves known on Earth, they both have to rob human beings of their free will to act on Earth directly, even if angels are somewhat nicer about it. I don't want to harp on every single time Supernatural just completely screws up its citations, because it is, again, an urban fantasy show on the CW network, but I do find it extremely obnoxious when the show insists that it's referencing some particular work or event from history, and then turns around and either insults or ignores the work that it's referring to. Obviously, Supernatural screws up a lot of stuff having to do with the Bible, like when 1 minute Castiel authenticates the infallibility of the revelation found in the Gospel of Luke, Then 8 episodes later, he's telling us the Bible is full of errors. But to me, the most unforgivable of these errors isn't a Bible reference at all. In Season 6, we are introduced to the concept of purgatory as a new spiritual realm in addition to heaven and hell. In Season 6, Episode 7, when purgatory is explained to the brothers for the first time, the alpha vampire tells the brothers that while heaven and hell are the places where human souls go, purgatory is where the souls of monsters like vampires go after death, which is a central plot point of Season 6 going forward. While this is already a bonkers cosmology that makes no sense, it is not nearly as stupid as the justification that the alpha vampire gives for this explanation of purgatory. The vampire says, "Little rusty on our Dante boys?" What? Of all the authors you could reference to give your insane cosmology a tangential relationship to Christian theology, why would you pick Dante Alighieri, the one Catholic poet who spends literally 30+ chapters debunking your central point? I lost my mind when the vampire character made this claim because I was literally in the middle of Dante's Divine Comedy when I was watching this episode, and Dante says a lot of fantastical things in that book, but this is not one of them. As Dante goes from the Inferno to the Purgatorio, he says, "To run o'er better waters hoists its sail, the little vessel of my genius now, that leaves behind itself a sea so cruel, and of that second kingdom will I sing, wherein the human spirit doth purge itself, and to ascend to heaven becometh worthy." Dante literally says that the purpose of purgatory is to purify human souls before they go to heaven, and makes no reference at all to monsters. It boggles my mind why a show would intentionally invoke an author like Dante and then ignore what he says. It makes the writers of Supernatural sound like they're writing an undergraduate paper with info they misremembered from a wiki. God, as presented in fiction, is always going to be a dodgy part of any story adapting Christian ideas, because misunderstanding who and what God is how you get everything else wrong to begin with. The biggest ways in which Supernatural gets God wrong, at least in the 6 seasons of the show that I watched, are that Supernatural treats God in a similar way to how it treats angels, which is that it doesn't seem to understand that God is more than just like a really powerful and smart guy who happens to have been the first person to exist. But the reality is that, as I said earlier, God is not bound by time. He created time and exists apart from it, for he is absolutely eternal. God is a fact and not merely our origin point in history. As Malachi 3:6 expresses it, "I am the Lord and I change not." Because one of the most fundamental things that God is that he is. He cannot be said to only exist in one place or only one domain. So in Season 5 of Supernatural, when it's revealed that God isn't currently in heaven, but that he's on earth, it's just totally meaningless. One of the qualities we can use to describe God is omnipresence. God is present everywhere, all of the time. As God says in the book of the prophet Jeremiah, "I fill heaven and earth." So it doesn't make any sense to say that he has left heaven to go to earth in such a sense that we mean he's no longer in heaven also, because he's everywhere. There's nowhere that God isn't right at this moment. It also doesn't make any sense how several angels on the show think God is dead. For one thing, the angels should know that God isn't dead because every angel knows and sees God. The show seems to be directly attempting to contradict this idea to heighten the drama of angels having doubts during Season 4 by having a conversation where the angel Anna says, "Dean, do you know how many angels have actually seen God, seen his face?" And Dean replies, "All of you?" And Anna answers, 4 angels, 4, and I'm not one of them." Whereas in the Gospel of Matthew we read, "Their angels in heaven always look upon the face of my heavenly Father." The second problem with the angels believing God is dead is that if God were dead, every single thing that exists would simply blink out of existence. God is the underpinning not just for the historical moment of our creation, but that which allows us to continue to be at all. We could even be described as the daydreams of God. We only have existence because God continually keeps us in mind. God is existence itself. Western society can be best described as post-Christian in that everyone can be thought of as a descendant of Christian theology because until very recently, pretty much everyone was a Christian. Even those who profess to be opposed to Christianity today are still defining themselves in opposition to it, and so are working on the axioms that Christianity has established. A Western atheist, for example, isn't an atheist, they're a Christian atheist, and they commonly will hold a Christian position on things like social justice or respect for the poor, even if the philosophical underpinnings for those ideas aren't a part of their current purported beliefs. One of the more interesting, though surface-level holdovers is Latin and exorcisms. People recognize a power in Latin over demons, or at least they respect its function in popular culture even if they don't think this power or demons actually exist. It's actually really cool that shows still feel an impulse to include Latin, but what's missing in Supernatural is an understanding of why a Latin exorcism is able to expel a demon. There's nothing magic about Latin as a language, rather it's the fact that Latin is connected to the episcopal power of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, who have a direct line of descent from the first apostles. In other words, it's not that the words of a Latin exorcism expels demons because the incantation is special, but rather it's the fact that the Latin prayer is done with the official language and the official words of the Roman Church. It's done by the authority of a bishop, who has been bestowed supernatural authority over demons, and can delegate that authority to others in his diocese. I bring this up because I am assuming that the Winchester brothers did not get commissioned from their local bishop with authority over demons. This matters because the exorcism prayers used in the show are based off of the one in the Ritual Romanum, the Catholic book of rituals. The form of the exorcism used in the Phantom Traveler episode, the Swap Meat episode, and the Repo Man episode all reference the power of the church and make reference to the idea that the person saying the prayer is a part of the church, which neither Dean nor Sam actually are. By using the prayer from the Ritual Romanum in particular, it brings into question for me why the demons are being successfully expelled by the brothers at all, and why the demons don't just ignore the brothers. An exorcism on Supernatural almost seems like a magic incantation that just always works irrespective of the words you're saying or your actual intent. It's strange and represents an excessively occult idea of why what Christianity does is effective against demonic forces. Again, though, it is cool to see the power of rites of this kind, and it is interesting that they picked one that actually exists. I have done a lot of complaining in this video, so it's time to talk about what I actually liked. Despite all of my annoyance about how Supernatural gets so much stuff wrong, there is a lot that is genuinely good about the show. Obviously, the love that the brothers have for each other is a worthwhile and positive portrayal, and a great central relationship for the show, even if that love gets pushed towards evil extremes, like making demonic deals to bring one another back from the dead. But even there, these deals with demons are portrayed as an expressly dangerous and evil thing with unintended consequences from the malicious activity of the demons, which frankly is a much healthier way to portray demons than turning them into straight-up protagonists as would something like Fox and Netflix's Lucifer. The danger of experimenting with demonic forces for personal gain is probably best expressed in Season 3, Episode 9, where Sam and Dean discover a coven of witches who are invoking the power of a demon to get minor social improvements like a promotion at work or a trip to Hawaii. In a surprisingly true-to-life turn of events, the demon that the coven of witches are invoking turns against them, and every witch ends up dead by the end of the episode. As far as cautionary tales go, it's pretty solid. I'm glad that even though this show plays fast and loose with what a demon even is, it's consistent that cooperating with demonic forces always ends badly for humans and human souls. It's not a high bar to clear for positive messaging, but it's better than glorifying witchcraft like Buffy the Vampire Slayer does after Season 2. Although Buffy is a great show in other ways and sometimes tries to tie the use of magic into themes of drug use, which was interesting in its own right. Of course, like every CW show, I'm sure Supernatural rewrites its lore like 20 times as the series progresses, so likely what I'm saying is completely irrelevant by Season 15. Supernatural is a genuinely entertaining show, and I enjoyed the first 6 seasons. Maybe someday, against my better judgment, I'll return to the series and watch the rest. Though if I do watch more, it's going to be pretty much solely to see more of Mark Sheppard's Crowley, because there was not nearly enough of him in Season 5 and 6, and Sheppard elevates every show he appears on. Thanks for listening to a 400-word rant about Supernatural where I barely even talked about the plot and just catechized you instead. Do the YouTube things if you want to do them.